the Supreme Court, to my mind, is like the thing that we have left, this mighty, mighty bulwark against abuses by the executive and all kinds of state power abuses. So, what happens if the Trump administration just gives them the middle finger?
I mean, that's the by far the biggest and most important question, because the reality of our government is that although we have three co-equal branches that are intended to check one another in all sorts of ways, it's kind of endless, conflict for power that would eventually create a balance of power as the founders envisioned it. It's the executive branch with who has all the people with the guns. Congress has a few, but not very many, as we saw on January 6th. They're not exactly an impressive force. And the Supreme Court has essentially none. And the way our country has always functioned is that we have accepted the legitimacy of the Supreme Court as the final body that interprets the outer limits of the law and the constraints of the Constitution. And the elected branches, including the president, the executive branch, have honored that voluntarily, basically. There's that famous apocryphal quote from Andrew Jackson: "Oh, the Supreme Court has made its ruling; now let it enforce it." But even then, there was a kind of compromise and an understanding that if the three branches start to disregard each other's prerogatives, that the entire republic breaks down. That the whole framework, as envisioned by the founders, is no longer viable. And so, I think on the one hand, Trump understands this because he was asked in the first month of his presidency what would happen if the Supreme Court rules against him. Would he abide by a Supreme Court ruling, or are there circumstances under which he would proclaim the ruling invalid and therefore violate it? He said, "No, I would never violate a Supreme Court ruling. I would always, of course, abide by a Supreme Court ruling." But then on the other hand, you have a Supreme Court led by John Roberts, who is uh, known for being very guarded about the legitimacy of the court. And I think the Supreme Court is definitely not eager to rush headlong into a confrontation with the executive branch, where they are essentially saying, "You are now violating our court order, and you are hereby required to take the following steps," because that will essentially force a constitutional crisis that any rational and sane person would want to avoid. And I think that was why, when the Supreme Court ruled on this Rigo Garcia case, what had happened was the lower court, the district court, had issued this very aggressive injunction that didn't just say you have to facilitate his return. It said you have to facilitate, and I forget the exact verb, but it was basically, uh,
Effectuate? Was that what it
yeah,
was?
effectuate. Exactly, effectuate. You have to actually get him back. Like, it doesn't matter what you have to do. You get him back in order to comply with this order. And the Supreme Court said, "Look, effectuate is too strong because that might actually require the courts to interfere in what is clearly the powers of the presidency under the Constitution." Like I said, it, like, you could force the president to sanction El Salvador. You could force the president to invade El Salvador. These are clearly things the court can't order the president to do. So the Supreme Court pulled back a little bit and said, "We're not going to force you to effectuate it, but we are going to force you to do everything you can to facilitate it and show us what you've done." Clearly, Trump or Stephen Miller and who's ever making these decisions stuck a huge middle finger up at the Supreme Court. Again, even this was not a 5-4 ruling with Kagan, Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Amy Coney Barrett, and John Roberts. This had, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito and Neil Gorsuch's signature on it as well. And the Supreme Court, for its own legitimacy, is going to have to say something. Maybe they'll accept some very minimalist effort that the Trump administration can demonstrate that it expended just so that everybody can save face. But even if that happens in this particular case, even if there's some face saving resolution for everybody, the collision course that the Trump administration is clearly on with the judiciary is inevitable, because the Trump administration believes that it does not have to give due process to anybody that it wants to remove from this country for any reason. And as you said, they even believe that as long as they get you out of the country, even if you're a citizen, the Supreme Court's jurisdiction over what could happen immediately comes to an end as soon as you're over international waters. And this is not a theory or a framework that the judiciary can accept without completely rendering itself, a joke, just utterly neutered. And I don't know how that's gonna end. We're definitely in the middle of a very delicate situation, and I think both John Roberts and the court, on the one hand, and the smarter people inside the Trump administration, or maybe the less extremist people in the Trump administration on the other, understand that. But right now, especially when it comes to immigration, there's this almost like very religious type extremism that does not permit any limitations of any kind on what their agenda is. And I think that's what's driving so much of this. If this were any other issue, it wouldn't be quite as inflammatory. But because it's deportation and the expulsion of people who they believe shouldn't be in our country, I think they have an absolute democratic mandate to do anything necessary to get them out.
Hey, that was a clip from Just Asking Questions. You can watch another one here or the full episode here. And please subscribe to our brand new channel to get us started off right and be notified when new episodes or clips go up. Thanks for watching.